The first thing I noticed wasn't the laughter or the music, it was the sound of bristles scraping tile, slow and stubborn, like someone trying to erase a mistake that wouldn't come up. That sound stopped me in the doorway before my brain could catch up to my body. I remember thinking, absurdly, that it didn't belong to Christmas Eve. Not in a house like this. Not under a ceiling strung with warm lights and fake pine garlands that smelled faintly of money and citrus cleaner. I hadn't told anyone I was coming. That was intentional. I wanted to surprise my wife, show up early with the gifts she'd forgotten in the trunk, play the role I'd learned to play so well, the agreeable husband, the flexible son-in-law, the man who never made things uncomfortable. I stood there with my coat half on, keys still in my hand, wondering if I'd stepped into the wrong house or the wrong year of my life. Then I saw him. My son was on his knees on the kitchen floor, barefoot, wearing only his underwear and an old undershirt that hung off one shoulder. He was small against the expanse of marble tile, his back rounded the way kids get when they're concentrating too hard. In his hands was a scrub brush, the cheap kind with plastic bristles, moving back and forth over a sticky patch of dried juice. Each stroke made that sound again. Scrape, pause, scrape, like a clock counting down to something I didn't want to name. A few feet away, by the tree, my in-laws' kids were tearing through wrapping paper. Bright boxes, new toys, shrieks of excitement. The room was full of color and noise and celebration, all of it pooling around everything except my son. He didn't look up. He didn't cry. He scrubbed. For a second, maybe longer, I couldn't breathe. My mind did this strange split where part of me floated above the scene, cataloging details the way I do at work when things go wrong. The smear on the tile. The red cup tipped on its side. The way no one seemed to notice a half-naked child on the floor. And another part of me, deeper and louder, started to pound against my ribs like it wanted out. I scanned the room and found my wife near the counter, a glass of wine in her hand, laughing at something her sister had said. She saw me then. Our eyes met, and in that instant I watched a calculation flicker across her face. Surprise, irritation, a warning. Her smile didn't drop. She didn't move. I took a step inside. The scrub brush stopped. My son looked up at me, eyes wide, then careful, like he wasn't sure which version of himself I was going to need right now. I realized, with a cold clarity, that he'd already learned this skill, reading the room, shrinking when necessary. That hurt more than the scene itself. "Dad," he said softly, like he might break something if he spoke too loud. I knelt in front of him without thinking. The floor was cold through my jeans. Up close, I could see his hands were red, skin wrinkled from the cleaner. My chest tightened. I wanted to wrap him up, to shield him from the entire room, but years of training, be polite, don't cause a scene, rose up automatically, trying to slow me down. "Why are you on the floor?" I asked. I kept my voice even. That took effort. He glanced toward the counter, then back at me. "I spilled juice," he said. Not apologetic. Just factual. "They said I had to clean it before presents." Not Mom said. Not Grandma. Just they. A faceless authority that didn't need to explain itself. I looked at the stain. It was already dry. It could have waited. Or better yet, it could have been wiped up by any one of the adults standing around with full hands and full glasses. My ears rang as I stood, slowly, and took in the room again. The way conversations dipped, then resumed. The way eyes slid past me. The way my son began scrubbing again, as if my presence was a brief interruption, not a rescue. That's when something ugly and honest surfaced inside me. This wasn't new. The realization hit me harder than anger. It came with memories I'd filed away and labeled harmless. Jokes about my job that weren't really jokes, comments about our side of the family, the way my son was always the one asked to help, to wait, to behave. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself it was easier not to push back. I told myself I was being mature. Standing there, listening to that brush scrape tile, I understood what my maturity had bought. I walked to the counter and set my keys down carefully, deliberately, like I was anchoring myself to something solid. My wife turned toward me, her smile tight now. "He made a little mess," she said lightly, as if narrating a commercial. "It's fine. He's almost done." Almost done. Like this was a task he'd chosen. Like there was a finish line he just needed to cross. I didn't answer her. I walked back to my son and crouched again. Up close, he smelled like soap and something sour. Fear, maybe, or the effort of holding it together. I put my hands under his arms and lifted him before anyone could say another word. He startled, wrapping his legs around my waist instinctively. "Dad." "I've got you," I said. The words came out rougher than I meant, but I didn't take them back. The room went quiet in that way that pretends to be polite. I felt every eye on us. My heart hammered. Old instincts screamed at me to explain, to smooth things over, to laugh it off. I'd spent years earning approval by being reasonable. I looked at my mother-in-law. She stood there with her champagne glass poised midair, eyebrows raised, already annoyed. I saw, suddenly, how small I must have looked to her all these years. How predictable. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I said 5 words. I won't repeat them here, not yet, but they landed with a weight I'd never allowed myself before. The glass slipped from her hand and shattered on the floor, bubbles hissing as they died. No one moved. My wife stared at me like I'd become a stranger. I held my son tighter. His head tucked into my shoulder, his breathing uneven. In that moment I felt something shift, not in the room, but in me. A line I hadn't known how to draw finally appeared, bright and unavoidable. As I turned toward the door, my heart was racing, but beneath the fear was something steadier. A thought that followed me out into the cold night, heavy and undeniable. I should have done this sooner. Behind me, the house buzzed back to life, voices overlapping, explanations forming. Ahead of me was the driveway, the dark, and the long drive home. I stepped outside anyway, not knowing yet how much this would cost, but knowing for the first time in a long while, exactly what it was worth. I didn't plan the words. That's what people don't understand when they ask me later, "What exactly did you say?" As if I'd rehearsed it in the car, practiced in the mirror, waited for the perfect line. The truth is simpler and more dangerous. The words came from a place in me that had been quiet for years, buried under compromise and caution, under the belief that keeping the peace was the same thing as being a good man. I stood there holding my son, his arms locked around my neck, his face pressed into my shoulder like he was afraid the floor might pull him back if he let go. His body was warm and trembling, and I hated myself for not noticing that kind of fear sooner. I felt it then, hot, rising, undeniable. Not rage. Resolve. The room waited. I could feel it in the way the air thickened, in the way conversations died mid-sentence. This was their house. Their rules. I'd always understood that. I'd walked carefully here for years, laughing at the right jokes, nodding at the right comments, letting things slide because pushing back felt inconvenient. Too emotional. Too dramatic. My mother-in-law was the first to recover. She tilted her head, lips pursed, already annoyed at the disruption. "What are you doing?" she asked. Not concerned. Corrective. Like I'd misplaced something. I looked at her and saw, with sudden clarity, how many times I'd shrunk myself in this room. How many small humiliations I'd accepted because they came wrapped in politeness and crystal glasses. My son shifted in my arms, fingers digging into my shirt. I said the 5 words then. They weren't clever. They weren't loud. They were final. "We're leaving. Right now." The sentence hung there, heavy and unfamiliar. For a moment, no one reacted. It was like I'd spoken in a language they didn't recognize, one without room for negotiation. My wife laughed softly, the way she did when she wanted to smooth things over. "Don't be ridiculous," she said. "It's Christmas." He just needed to clean up. Just needed. Like this was reasonable. Like I was the one overreacting. I didn't answer her. I didn't look away either. That alone felt like a rebellion. My mother-in-law's eyebrows shot up, color rising in her cheeks. "You are making a scene," she said sharply. "Put him down. He needs to learn responsibility." Responsibility. The word landed wrong. It scraped against something raw inside me. I thought about all the responsibilities I'd shouldered quietly, the late nights, the compromises at work, the swallowed pride. I thought about how often responsibility seemed to fall hardest on the smallest person in the room. My grip tightened on my son, protective, instinctive. "He's 6, I said. My voice surprised me. Steady. He spilled juice." "That's not the point," she snapped. "No," I said and shook my head once. "It is." The champagne glass slipped from her hand then. It hit the floor and shattered, the sound sharp and final. Tiny shards skittered across the tile, catching the light like fragments of something fragile that had finally broken. No one moved. I felt my wife stiffen. "You're embarrassing us," she hissed under her breath, stepping closer. "You're acting like they abused him." Abused? The word echoed in my head, heavy with implication. I looked down at my son, at the way he clung to me, silent and compliant, already internalizing the idea that he deserved this. I wondered how many moments like this it took to shape a child. How many lessons were taught without ever being named. "I'm acting like his father," I said. That did it. Her face changed, not anger, exactly, but something defensive, something threatened. "You're blowing this out of proportion," she said. "My parents were just..." "Enough," I cut in. The word cracked through the room. I'd never interrupted her like that before. I saw it land, saw the surprise ripple across her face. For years, I'd let conversations run over me, let decisions be made around me. This time, I stayed standing. I turned toward the tree, toward the kids still frozen mid-unwrapping, their parents watching with thin smiles. I didn't need their approval. I didn't want it. I reached down with my free hand and grabbed our coats from the chair by the door. The movement felt surreal, like I was stepping out of a version of myself I'd been playing for too long. My mother-in-law found her voice again. "If you walk out," she said coldly, "don't bother coming back." There was the threat dressed up as dignity. I felt the old instinct flare. Apologize, explain, de-escalate. I imagined the drive home alone, the fallout, the phone calls. Fear buzzed under my skin. Then my son shifted again, his breathing shallow against my neck, and the fear settled into something else. "I won't," I said. The simplicity of it stunned me. I hadn't argued. I hadn't justified myself. I just told the truth. My wife stared at me, searching my face for the man who would back down, who would soften. She didn't find him. "Get in the car," I murmured to my son as I lowered him gently to the floor. He hesitated, eyes flicking around the room, then nodded. He pulled on his pants with shaking hands while I stood between him and everyone else, a barrier I should have been years ago. We walked out together. No dramatic exit. No shouting. Just the quiet sound of the door opening and closing behind us. The cold hit my face like a slap. I sucked in a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. My hands shook as I buckled my son into his seat, my movements clumsy, adrenaline still surging. "Am I in trouble?" he asked softly. The question broke something in me. I knelt beside the car, meeting his eyes. "No," I said, and meant it with everything I had. "You didn't do anything wrong." He studied my face, like he was testing the truth of it. Finally, he nodded and leaned back, exhaustion washing over him. As I closed the door and walked around to the driver's seat, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I ignored it. The house behind us glowed warm and bright, untouched by what had just happened. I sat there for a moment with my hands on the steering wheel, heart pounding, mind racing ahead to consequences I couldn't yet see. I knew there would be fallout. I knew nothing about this would be easy. But as I pulled out of the driveway, tires crunching softly on gravel, a strange calm settled over me. I hadn't just said 5 words. I'd crossed a line I could never uncross. And somewhere behind us, in a house full of broken glass and unspoken rules, Christmas went on without us. The car felt smaller than it ever had before, like the silence inside it had weight. I pulled onto the road and let the headlights cut a narrow tunnel through the dark, the house shrinking behind us in the rearview mirror until it was just another patch of light I could choose not to look at. For the first few minutes, neither of us spoke. My son sat in the back seat, seatbelt snug across his chest, his knees pulled up slightly like he was trying to make himself smaller. He stared out the window, watching Christmas lights blur past, reflections sliding across the glass and disappearing before he could hold on to them. I kept my eyes on the road, hands tight on the steering wheel, my heart still beating too fast. I replayed the moment over and over, the sound of the glass breaking, my wife's face, the way my mother-in-law's voice sharpened when she realized I wasn't backing down. Part of me waited for regret to hit, for that familiar wave of second-guessing. It didn't come. Instead, something heavier settled in. Guilt. It crept in quietly, the way it always did, wearing a reasonable face. Why didn't you come earlier? Why didn't you notice? Why did it take this public humiliation, for you to finally act? I glanced in the rearview mirror. My son caught my eye and looked away immediately, like he'd been caught doing something wrong. "Hey," I said gently. "You okay?" He nodded too fast. "Yeah." That one word told me everything. The road curved, tires humming softly against the asphalt. The radio stayed off. I needed the quiet, even though it pressed against my ears. I needed to sit with what I'd done, and what I hadn't done soon enough. After a few more minutes, he spoke again, barely above a whisper. "Dad." I swallowed. "Yeah. I'm sorry," he said. The words hit me harder than anything else that night. "For what?" I asked, even though I already knew. "For spilling the juice," he said. "And for making you mad." I felt something crack open in my chest. I eased the car to a slower speed, my foot lighter on the pedal, like the road itself had suddenly become fragile. "I wasn't mad at you," I said. "Not even a little." He frowned, confused. "But everyone was mad." Everyone. I thought about that word, about how easily it can turn into a rule. I searched for the right thing to say, knowing this was one of those moments that mattered more than all the lectures I'd ever given. "They shouldn't have been," I said finally. "Accidents happen. Especially to kids." He picked at the edge of his sleeve, quiet again. I could see him processing, trying to fit my words into a world that had already taught him different lessons. A red light stopped us at an empty intersection. I turned in my seat to face him more fully. "Listen to me," I said. "You are not in trouble. You didn't ruin anything. Okay?" He hesitated. "But Grandma said—" "I don't care what Grandma said," I interrupted, then softened my tone. "What matters is this: you don't ever have to earn being treated kindly. Not by cleaning floors. Not by being quiet. Not by making yourself smaller." His eyes flicked up to mine, uncertain, like he was waiting for the catch. "Really? Really?" The light turned green. I drove on, my vision blurring for a moment as emotions surged up unexpectedly. I blinked it away, focusing on the road. As the miles passed, his body relaxed. His head leaned against the window, eyelids drooping. Exhaustion crept over him the way it does with kids once the adrenaline fades. Watching him, a different kind of guilt rose up, sharper, more personal. How many times had I let moments slide because confronting them felt uncomfortable? How often had I told myself it was fine, that he was resilient, that I didn't want to start something? Resilient. That word had always sounded like a compliment. Tonight it felt like an excuse. I thought about my own childhood, about the things I'd learned early: don't talk back, don't draw attention, don't make adults uncomfortable. I'd carried those rules into my marriage, into my work, into every room where I felt slightly out of place. Somewhere along the way, I'd mistaken silence for strength. My phone buzzed in the cup holder. Then again. I didn't pick it up. I already knew who it was. I wasn't ready to hear their version of what had just happened. At another stoplight, my son stirred. "Dad." "Yeah. Are we still a family?" The question landed softly and wrecked me all the same. "Yes," I said without hesitation. "Always." "But Mom was mad," he said. I took a breath. This was harder. "Your mom and I are adults," I said carefully. "We'll figure our stuff out. That's not your job." He nodded, accepting it the way kids do when they sense honesty, even if they don't fully understand it. We pulled into our driveway not long after. The house was dark, quiet, undecorated. No music. No laughter. Just the familiar shape of home waiting for us. I turned off the engine and sat there for a moment, listening to it tick as it cooled. The night pressed in around us, cold and still. Before I unbuckled him, I turned in my seat again. "I want you to remember something," I said. "What happened tonight wasn't your fault. And if anyone ever makes you feel like it is, you come to me. Every time." He studied my face, searching. Then he nodded, slower this time, more certain. "Okay," he said. I walked him inside, helped him change into pajamas, tucked him into bed. He fell asleep quickly, his hands still curled around mine until the last possible second. When I finally stood alone in the hallway, the quiet felt different than it had in the car. Heavier. More permanent. My phone buzzed again. I looked at the screen. Missed call. Then another. And another. I set the phone face down on the counter and leaned against it, staring into the dark kitchen. The adrenaline was gone now, replaced by something steadier and more frightening. I'd protected my son. Now I was going to have to face everything else. And I knew, deep down, that the hardest conversations were still ahead. The house stayed quiet longer than I expected. I tucked my son in, stood in the hallway until his breathing evened out, then drifted from room to room like I was seeing the place for the first time. The decorations we'd half-heartedly put up earlier in the month looked unfinished now, lights without warmth, ornaments without meaning. Everything felt paused, like the night was holding its breath. I knew she would come home eventually. I just didn't know which version of her would walk through the door. I sat at the kitchen table and waited. When the lock finally turned, it was almost midnight. The door opened slowly, deliberately. She didn't call my name. She set her keys down louder than necessary and shrugged off her coat. I stayed where I was, hands folded around a mug I'd reheated twice without drinking. She saw me then and stopped. "So," she said. One word, sharp. "You happy now?" I didn't answer right away. I watched her face, the tension around her mouth, the way she already had her defenses up. For years, I'd learned to anticipate this, to soften my tone, to meet her halfway before she even asked. Tonight, I didn't move. "We need to talk," I said. She scoffed, walking past me toward the counter. "There's nothing to talk about. You embarrassed my family. On Christmas Eve." My chest tightened, but I kept my voice level. Our son was scrubbing a floor in his underwear. She waved a hand dismissively. "It was juice. He made a mess. My parents believe in teaching responsibility." Responsibility again. I leaned back in my chair, the wood creaking softly. "Do you hear yourself?" I asked. "He's 6. She spun around then, eyes flashing. "You're acting like they beat him. You always do this. You turn everything into a moral crisis." "Boys." The word landed heavier than she meant it to, dragging a trail of memories behind it. I thought about all the times I'd swallowed my discomfort to avoid this exact argument. The dinners I'd sat through, the comments I'd let slide. The way I'd convinced myself that loving her meant enduring everything around her. "I didn't turn anything into anything," I said quietly. "I reacted to what was right in front of me." She crossed her arms. "You could have handled it privately. You didn't have to make a spectacle." There was the real accusation. Not that I was wrong. That I was loud. "When?" I asked. "Later? After dessert? After presents?" She didn't answer. I stood up slowly, feeling the weight of the moment settle into my bones. "You were laughing," I said. "You saw him on the floor and you laughed." Her face tightened. "I didn't think." "That's the problem," I said. The words came out before I could soften them. "You didn't think. Or you did, and decided it was easier not to care." She looked at me like I'd slapped her. "That's not fair." "No," I said. "What happened tonight wasn't fair." Silence stretched between us, thick and uncomfortable. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator, the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. Ordinary sounds in a suddenly unfamiliar marriage. She sank into a chair, rubbing her temples. "You don't understand my parents," she said, her voice quieter now. "They're too particular. If you challenge them, it just gets worse." The honesty in that stopped me. "So you let it happen," I said. Not accusing. Just stating it. She looked away. In that moment, something clicked into place. This wasn't just about tonight. This was about years of looking the other way. of choosing comfort over confrontation, of teaching our son, without words, that his feelings were negotiable. I've spent my whole marriage trying not to upset anyone, I said. Do you know what that's taught him? She didn't answer. That his job is to adapt, I continued. That love is conditional. That if he behaves well enough, maybe he won't be a problem. Her eyes filled, but she didn't wipe them away. What do you want me to say? She asked. I want you to see it, I said. I want you to admit that what happened wasn't okay. She shook her head slowly. I can't turn my back on my family. The words settled between us like a verdict. I'm not asking you to, I said. I'm asking you to stand with us. She pressed her lips together. I could see the conflict in her. The daughter she'd always been versus the mother she needed to be. For the first time, I realized how long she'd been choosing the former. I don't know how, she whispered. I felt a strange mix of sadness and resolve. Then you need to learn, I said. Because I'm done pretending this doesn't matter. She looked up at me then, really looked like she was seeing the cost of that sentence for the first time. What happens now? She asked. I exhaled slowly. Now we decide what kind of parents we're going to be, I said. And what kind of marriage we're willing to fight for. She didn't respond. The silence stretched again, heavier this time, loaded with everything unsaid. I turned toward the hallway, toward our son's room, and felt the truth settle deep in my chest. Tonight wasn't just a confrontation. It was a reckoning. And whether she chose to face it with me or not would change everything. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because I was wired or angry, but because my mind kept circling the same uncomfortable truth, the kind you can't outrun once you finally give it a name. I lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet house settle, and realized how much of my life had been built around one simple idea. Don't make things harder than they need to be. It sounded reasonable. Responsible, even. It was the story I'd told myself every time I bit my tongue or took the long way around a conflict. Being easygoing had become my brand. At work, it made me reliable. In my marriage, it made me agreeable. In my family, it made me invisible. I got up before dawn and made coffee I barely tasted. The kitchen light hummed softly overhead, and for the first time in years, I didn't turn on the radio. I wanted to hear my own thoughts, even if they weren't kind. I thought about my job. About the way my boss always came to me when something needed fixing quickly, quietly. How my name never came up in meetings unless there was a problem no one else wanted. I told myself it meant I was trusted. That being indispensable was its own reward. What I didn't tell myself was how often credit went elsewhere. How raises stalled. How I learned to accept, maybe next year, with a nod and a half smile. I remembered the last performance review, the way my manager leaned back in his chair and said, "You're great to work with." No drama. No drama. At the time, I'd taken it as praise. Now it sounded like a warning. I carried my mug into the living room and sat on the edge of the couch, elbows on my knees. The Christmas tree stood in the corner, lights still on from the night before. Gifts underneath it waited patiently, untouched. I stared at them and felt something twist in my chest. How many moments had I waited out like that? How many times had I told myself, just get through this and then things will change? They never did. Being easygoing didn't protect me. It trained people. It taught them how much I would tolerate. I thought about the dinners with my in-laws, the offhand comments about my career, the jokes that landed a little too close to the truth. I'd laughed them off, told myself they didn't matter. I'd mistaken endurance for strength, patience for wisdom. But standing in that kitchen the night before, watching my son scrub a floor, I'd seen the cost laid bare. The price of my silence wasn't just mine anymore. It had passed down. That realization sat heavy in my chest, equal parts shame and resolve. I rubbed my hands over my face, feeling older than I had the day before, but also, strangely, clearer. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. I didn't have to look to know who it was. I let it buzz. Then again. Then again. I thought about answering, about explaining myself in careful language, about apologizing just enough to make the discomfort go away. I imagined the relief that would bring. Temporary. Hollow. Instead, I stood and walked down the hallway to my son's room. He was still asleep, sprawled diagonally across the bed, one arm flung over his pillow. His face was peaceful, unguarded. I watched him breathe for a moment, steady and sure, and felt something inside me harden, not in anger, but in intention. This was where it ended. Not the marriage. Not the family. The pattern. I sat on the edge of his bed and rested a hand lightly on his back. He stirred, then relaxed again. I wondered what kind of man he would become if I stayed the way I was. If I kept choosing ease over courage. The answer came quickly, and I didn't like it. I went back to the kitchen and finally checked my phone. Missed calls. Messages. Some angry. Some concerned. Some dripping with disappointment disguised as love. One message stood out. My wife. We need to talk. This can't happen again. I read it twice. She was right in a way. It couldn't happen again. But not for the reason she meant. I typed a response slowly, deliberately, like each word mattered because it did. I agree. What happened last night shouldn't happen again. To him. Or to us. I stared at the screen before hitting send, feeling the old urge to soften it, to add something reassuring. I didn't. The message went through. A small thing. A big shift. I realized then that change wasn't going to come in one dramatic moment. It was going to be built out of 100 decisions like that, uncomfortable, clarifying, irreversible. Being easygoing had been my armor. I'd worn it so long I forgot it was optional. I thought about the word assertive, how it used to make me uncomfortable. How I'd associated it with aggression, with conflict. Now I understood it differently. Assertive meant present. It meant saying, this matters to me. The house began to wake. Pipes clicked. Somewhere, a neighbor's car started. Life, ordinary and persistent, carried on. I stood at the window and watched the sky lighten, feeling something unfamiliar settle into place. Not confidence. Clarity. For the first time in years, I wasn't asking myself how to keep everyone else comfortable. I was asking what kind of man I wanted my son to remember. And I knew the answer would cost me. But I also knew, without hesitation, that I was finally willing to pay it. The numbers stared back at me from the screen like an accusation. 47 missed calls. I didn't know when it had climbed that high. I only knew that seeing it made my stomach tighten in a way that felt familiar. Old anxiety, well practiced. The kind that used to send me scrambling to explain myself before anyone asked. I set the phone back down on the counter and leaned against it, palms flat, breathing slowly until the urge to react passed. The house was quiet again. My son was at school. My wife had left early without saying much, the space between us thick with unfinished sentences. I'd watched her drive away from the window, feeling that strange mix of relief and dread that comes when you stop pretending everything is fine. The phone buzzed again. I didn't pick it up. Instead, I made breakfast, cleaned the kitchen, and sat at the table with a notebook I hadn't used in years. It felt almost absurd, like I was preparing for a meeting with myself. I stared at the blank page, pen hovering, and finally wrote one sentence. This is what I will no longer accept. The words steadied me. I added another line. Disrespect disguised as tradition. Then another. Silence as the price of belonging. I didn't know who I was going to show this to, if anyone. That wasn't the point. For the first time, I wasn't organizing my thoughts to be palatable. I was organizing them to be true. The phone buzzed again. A voicemail notification popped up, followed by a text. Then another. I could almost hear the voices before I played them, concern curdling into anger, authority tightening with each unanswered call. I finally picked up the phone and scrolled through the list. My mother-in-law. 12 times. My father-in-law. 9. My wife's sister. 6. Numbers from cousins I barely spoke to. Unknown numbers. People who had never once called me just to ask how I was. I selected the first voicemail and pressed play. Her voice filled the kitchen, controlled and clipped. We need to talk about what happened. You owe this family an explanation. Another message followed, her tone sharper now. This behavior is unacceptable. You embarrassed us in our own home. I deleted it without finishing. The next voicemail was my father-in-law. Lower voice. Measured. You need to fix this, he said. Your wife is beside herself. Fix this. I sat there listening to the refrigerator hum, to the echo of words that had shaped my life more than I liked to admit. Smooth over. McRight. The responsibility had always landed with me, the one least likely to push back. My phone buzzed with a text from my wife. My parents are furious. They're saying you humiliated them. Please call them. I read it twice. There was no mention of our son. I typed a response, erased it, then typed again. I'm not calling to apologize for protecting him. The dots appeared almost immediately. Then disappeared. Then reappeared. This is blowing up. You're making it worse. I closed my eyes and exhaled slowly. This was the moment I'd always folded before. The moment when social pressure masqueraded as reason. I'm making it clear, I typed. There's a difference. I set the phone down before I could soften it. A few minutes later, it rang. I let it ring twice. 3 times. Then I answered. Yes, I said. Her voice came through sharp and immediate. What is wrong with you? I didn't flinch. Nothing. You stormed out like a child, she said. Do you have any idea what people are saying? I pictured my son's small hands wrapped around a scrub brush. The red skin. The lowered eyes. I don't care, I said. There was a pause, brief but telling. You should, she snapped. This family has standards. So do I said. Her breath caught just slightly. I could hear the disbelief settling in. This is not how things are done, she said. Then they need to change, I replied. Silence. I waited. For anger. For threats. They came, just not all at once. If you don't apologize, she said finally, there will be consequences. I nodded, even though she couldn't see it. I understand. And I'm still not apologizing. She hung up. I set the phone down gently and sat there, heart pounding, hands steady. The fear came then, late and insistent. The what-if spiral. The social exile. The strain on my marriage. The isolation. I let it wash over me without acting on it. This was the cost. And for the first time, I wasn't pretending it didn't exist. That afternoon, my wife came home early. She stood in the doorway, arms crossed, eyes tired. They're cutting us off for a while, she said. No calls. No visits. I looked at her carefully. And how do you feel about that? She hesitated. I feel like everything is falling apart. I nodded. Sometimes it has too. She stared at me, searching my face for the man who would panic, who would rush to repair the damage. She didn't find him. This is who you are now? She asked quietly. I thought about the notebook on the table. About my son asleep the night before, finally unburdened. This is who I should have been, I said. She didn't answer. She turned and walked down the hallway, leaving the question hanging between us. I sat back at the table and looked at my phone one last time. 47 missed calls. I didn't need to return them. The message had already been sent. The meeting wasn't planned, not really. It was framed as a conversation, a chance to clear the air, but we all knew what it was. An intervention, dressed up as concern. A final opportunity for me to come back into line. My wife asked if I would come with her to her parents' house that Sunday afternoon. She didn't say please. She didn't say together. Just asked, carefully, like she already knew my answer might change something she wasn't ready to lose. I'll come, I said. But I'm not apologizing. She nodded once, tight-lipped. Just, don't make it worse. I didn't reply. We both knew worse was relative. The drive there felt different from the one on Christmas Eve. Quieter. Heavier. My son stayed home with a friend's family. That was intentional. Whatever happened next wasn't for him to witness. As we pulled into the driveway, the house looked exactly the same, grand, immaculate, unyielding. I noticed things I hadn't before. How the place seemed designed to impress rather than welcome. How every surface gleamed, untouched by real life. Inside, they were already waiting. My mother-in-law stood by the window, arms folded. My father-in-law sat in his usual chair, posture straight, hands clasped. My wife's sister hovered nearby, pretending to straighten something that didn't need it. No one offered coffee. We're glad you came, my father-in-law said, gesturing toward the couch. I stayed standing. Let's get this over with, my mother-in-law said. We've all been under a lot of stress because of what you did. What you did? I felt the old urge to defend myself, to explain the context, to soften the edges. I let it pass. I'm here to talk about what happened, I said. Not to be blamed for it. Her mouth tightened. You humiliated us. I nodded once. That wasn't my intention. My wife shifted beside me. I could feel her tension like static. But, I continued, I'm not sorry for stopping it. The room went still. You're exaggerating, her sister cut in. Kids need discipline. Discipline isn't humiliation, I said. And it isn't selective. My mother-in-law laughed sharply. Oh, please. You're turning this into something it's not. I looked at her directly. My son was on the floor in his underwear while other children opened presents. If you don't see a problem with that, then we don't share the same values. Silence fell hard. My father-in-law cleared his throat. We raised 3 children, he said. They turned out fine. Maybe, I said. But that doesn't give you authority over mine. My wife inhaled sharply. Can we not do this? She whispered. I turned to her, keeping my voice calm. This is exactly what we need to do. I faced them again. This is the line, I said. You don't discipline my child. You don't shame him. And if you ever do anything like that again, we will leave. Immediately. Every time. My mother-in-law stared at me like I'd spoken profanity. You would keep him from his grandparents? I would protect him, I said. From anyone. That landed. You're overstepping, she said coldly. No, I replied. I'm finally stepping where I should have all along. My wife's eyes glistened. You're tearing my family apart, she said. I turned to her fully then. I'm asking you to choose, I said gently. Not sides. Values. Her breath hitched. That's not fair. It's honest, I said. The room felt smaller, charged. This was the moment everything balanced on. I could still back down. I could still smooth it over, agree to a half apology, promise better communication. I thought about my son's question in the car. Are we still a family? Yes, I said aloud, more to myself than anyone else. We are. But not like this. My father-in-law stood. If you insist on these conditions, he said, then you should reconsider how often you come here. I nodded. I already have. My mother-in-law's voice dropped, dangerous and controlled. You think you're some kind of hero? No, I said. I think I waited too long. That was it. There was nothing left to argue. The silence that followed wasn't confused, it was final. I turned toward the door. My wife didn't move. I'm going home, I said. You can come with me. Or not. Her eyes searched mine, fear and anger tangled together. For a long moment, I thought she wouldn't move. Then she grabbed her coat. We left without another word. In the car, neither of us spoke. The tension sat between us, thick but different now. Not explosive. Resolved. As we pulled away, I felt something settle into place. Not relief. Alignment. For the first time, my actions matched my values. Whatever came next, I knew one thing for certain. That line would never be crossed again. The house was quiet when we got home. Not the awkward quiet of things left unsaid, but the kind that comes after a storm has already passed and taken the worst of the debris with it. I unlocked the door and stepped inside first, out of habit. The hallway light flickered on, revealing the same scuffed walls, the same coat rack leaning slightly to the left. Nothing had changed. And yet everything had. My wife set her keys down slowly, like the sound might wake something dangerous. She didn't look at me right away. I didn't push her to. For years, I'd rushed moments like this, filled the silence, softened the edges, offered compromises before they were asked for. I didn't do that anymore. We stood there for a moment, 2 people in the same space, both recalibrating who we were allowed to be now. I don't know how to feel, she finally said. I nodded. You don't have to know tonight. That seemed to loosen something in her shoulders. Our son was asleep when we checked on him. Curled on his side, one arm wrapped around the stuffed dinosaur he insisted wasn't for comfort. I watched his chest rise and fall, steady and unburdened. That was the win. Not the confrontation. Not the silence we'd walked out of. Back in the kitchen, I poured myself a glass of water. My hands were still steady. That surprised me. I'd spent most of my adult life confusing calm with avoidance. This was different. I kept thinking you'd back down, my wife said quietly. At their house. I met her eyes. So did I. She studied my face like she was seeing it for the first time. You didn't. No. Why? I took a breath. Because if I had, he would have learned something I can't undo. She swallowed. And what about me? That question mattered. I'm not asking you to abandon them, I said. I'm asking you to stop abandoning us. Tears slipped down her cheeks, not dramatic, not loud. Just honest. I didn't realize how much I'd normalized, she said. How often I looked away. I didn't say me too, even though it was true. This wasn't about sharing blame. It was about naming reality. We sat at the table, hands not touching but close enough to feel the warmth. For the first time in a long while, the future didn't feel like something happening to me. Later that night, after she went to bed, I sat alone in the living room. My phone buzzed. One missed call. Then another. I didn't check them. Instead, I thought about the man I'd been trying to be for years, the agreeable son-in-law, the reliable employee, the quiet husband who kept the peace by shrinking. I understood him now. He was scared, but he wasn't in charge anymore. The next morning, sunlight crept through the blinds. My son was already awake, sitting at the table drawing something fiercely with a red crayon. Dad, he said without looking up, I made us. I leaned over his shoulder. 3 stick figures stood under a crooked roof. One was noticeably bigger, standing a little in front of the others. That's you, he said. Something tightened in my chest. Why am I so big? I asked. He shrugged. Because you're not scared anymore. Kids see things adults spend years denying. I hugged him, right there in the kitchen. He hugged me back, unself-conscious and sure. Later, as I packed for work, I noticed something else had changed. The dread I usually felt on Sunday nights was gone. The job was still the job. The problems were still waiting. But so was I. I wasn't chasing approval anymore, at work or anywhere else. I was choosing alignment. That afternoon, my wife stood beside me as we made dinner. Not apologetic. Not defensive. Present. We'll need to talk about boundaries, she said. With them. I nodded. When you're ready. She looked at me, steady now. And if they don't respect them? I didn't hesitate. Then we keep choosing us. That was the answer. The phone buzzed again on the counter. I turned it face down. Some calls don't need to be answered. That night, lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling and felt something unfamiliar settle into my bones. Not victory. Integrity. I hadn't said 5 words that changed everything. I'd lived them. And for the first time, I knew exactly what we'd taken home with us. Not silence. Not guilt. But a future that finally fit.